Genghis Khan. The name rolls like thunder over the wide, empty grasslands, but the story begins small, with a boy named Temüjin, born under a gray sky on the Mongolian steppe around the year 1162. The steppe is a place that teaches you to listen. The wind speaks in long tones and the horizon seems to recede forever. Grasses ripple like water. Horses scatter dust in clouds that glint in the sun. Winters can be cruel, biting the bone, and summers scorch the ground until the grass curls brown. In such a land, life is measured by journeys, by herds, by the health of a mare and the sharpness of an arrow. Temüjin's father, Yesugei, was a man of some standing, a minor chieftain among the Borjigan line, a warrior who could ride and shoot and read a weather change by the behavior of the horses. He took care that his son learned the ways of the steppe, how to sit steady in the saddle, how to bend a bow until the string sang, how to read men's faces for honesty or guile. Mothers taught songs and recipes. Fathers taught hunting and the small cruelty of survival. Temüjin's mother, Hoelin, was a wise and indomitable woman, patient in the face of hunger, stubborn against the harshness of neighbors. She taught him thrift, endurance, and an understanding that loyalty costs more to maintain than it gives in moments of comfort. When Temüjin was still small, his fate bent like a young reed. Yesugei, returning from a trip to meet a bride's family for Temüjin, was poisoned by men from a rival clan. He died on the road, and with him vanished the protection that kept his family in place. The clan abandoned Hoelin and her children, taking her husband's goods and leaving the widow to fend for herself. The family's yurts were taken, their herds were scattered, and the children learned to sleep with hunger as a constant companion. Those early years taught Temüjin things that no school could teach. They taught him how people behave when there is nothing to gain, who whispers in the dark, and who stands by the fire. They taught him that kindness is a scarce coin, and that a leader must make others feel valued enough to follow. He learned how to trap fish in winter ice, how to stretch hides, how to make a rope from sinew. And he learned the bitter lesson that blood ties alone cannot be relied upon when the steppe's logic turns mean. Capture and escape came next, like a sudden storm. Temüjin, still young, was seized by the Temüjin, an enemy tribe, who fettered him and kept him as a prisoner. That night, with the help of a guard who remembered his father's old courtesy, Temüjin slipped away into the cold. He ran barefoot across stony ground, breath frosting in the air, until he reached a safety that was never quite secure again. The memory of being bound and helpless became, for him, a scar that hardened into resolve. Never again. The years after that were a patchwork of fights, alliances, betrayals, and small victories. Temüjin learned to reward merit rather than lineage. He pulled talented men to his side, blacksmiths and riders, cooks and scouts, regardless of their birth. This was a quiet revolution on the steppe, for ancient custom granted command by noble blood, not by skill. Men noticed that Temüjin kept his promises, and promises are rare where starving kin tempt one to steal what is left. Loyalty gathered, camps multiplied. There was friendship and there was rivalry. Jamuka, once a childhood companion, became both ally and enemy. They shared hunting grounds and oaths, then argued about the old ways and the new. When Jamuka embraced the old aristocratic customs and Temüjin opened rank to the capable, friction turned to violence. In one of the darker tales of this era, Jamuka's victory led to the capture of 70 young warriors loyal to Temüjin, and the cruel fate of those prisoners, boiled alive in a ceremonial slaughter, stuck in Temüjin's memory like a brand. It taught him that mercy and rage are both tools. He widened his caution to match his ambition. Temüjin was not only a warrior but a pragmatic reformer in small acts. He reorganized the fighting units into decimal groupings, tens, hundreds, thousands, units not based on kinship but on performance and trust. That simple mathematical ordering made a disciplined army out of disparate bands. It made logistics possible. It meant that a messenger could move orders swiftly, and a general could control movements with less confusion than before. This precision, the insistence on clear structure, became the backbone of Mongol power. Marriage to Burta was another turning point. Burta had been spirited away by the Merkits, a rival tribe, in one of those raids that are part seizure, part ceremony. Temüjin pursued, gathered allies, and rescued her. The rescue was not only brave, it was political. It secured him a wife and a claim to honor. Loyal men who fought beside him in the rescue never forgot it. Small acts like this, rescue, reward, feast, folded into larger currents of loyalty that rolled across the steppe. When the tribal leaders gathered near the Onan River in 1206, they named Temüjin the universal ruler, Genghis Khan the oceanic ruler. The title meant more than pride. It gave him the authority to bind former enemies and friends into a new order. From that day, the steppe's fractured tribes began to merge into something cohesive. A person could rise by skill, and a merchant could travel farther without fear of arbitrary theft. He enforced a code of laws, often called the Yasa, that combined draconian punishments with protections for trade and communication. It was a strange mix, harsh to offenders, but surprisingly modern in its support for commerce and meritocracy. Genghis Khan's campaigns would sweep outward like a storm. His early moves against neighboring tribes, the Merkits, the Naimans, were brutal and effective, consolidating the heartland. Then his attention turned to the great settled empires beyond the grass, the Jin dynasty to the east, and later the Khwarezmian domains and the lands of Central Asia. Mongol warfare combined speed, intelligence, and a willingness to adapt. They used horse archers who could loose a volley and ride away, turning the battlefield into a moving ring of death. They employed feigned retreats to lure disciplined but overconfident defenders into traps. They learned siegecraft from captured engineers, adopting catapults and siege towers. They were open to technology where others were proud and closed. Cities that thought walls protected them learned new, bitter lessons. A fortress once mired in its traditions would find its gate smitten by engines of war, and its inhabitants bewildered by the Mongols' unorthodox methods. Yet Genghis Khan rarely fought in the blind bloodlust the later stories sometimes suggest. He spared artisans, scholars, and skilled workers. He relocated craftsmen to serve the empire's needs, building bridges of practical exchange. He wanted hands that could make better arrows and stronger sieves, and minds that could keep records and run supply lines. Conquest, in his method, often ended with reorganization rather than mere ruin. One of the more famous episodes was his punitive expedition against the Khwarezmian Empire. A trade mission sent by the Khan was massacred in the cities of Central Asia when the Shah grew suspicious and killed the envoys. Genghis Khan responded with a campaign of terrible force. Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench. Cities fell, defenses shattered. The Mongols could be merciless. They could also harness a system of administration that let caravans run safely across vast distances, reviving the Silk Road. For the first time in decades, merchants could move east to west with less fear of marauding locals, and ideas and goods, silk, spices, paper, gunpowder, moved in a bustling, if uneasy, interchange. Through all this movement, there was a nervous, humming order underneath. The yam, the postal system of relay stations. Riders carried messages, fresh horses waiting at intervals like lungs, so that word traveled faster than an army. Intelligence mattered. Spies slouched in market crowds, merchants slipped reports hidden beneath bolts of cloth, and envoys moved with the careful arrogance of men who know the value of information. Genghis Khan used knowledge as a blade. He pried secrets out of towns. He learned the trades and strengths of foes, and he adapted more swiftly than many rulers, who relied more on old prestige than on new facts. The cultural effect of his conquests was messy and vast. He tolerated religion. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, each had places in his domains so long as they paid tax and obeyed law. It is said that he forbade the kidnapping of women and the killing of artisans, that he protected merchants with firm, if exacting, rules. At the same time, he enforced crushing punishments for murderers, thieves, and those who betrayed trust. The steppe is a place where savagery and order sit near each other, and he tried, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with ruthless clarity, to make the two work together. He was a shrewd diplomat as well as a warrior. He married his children into allied houses. He took hostages to guarantee treaties, and he used marriage and reward where others used only sword. Loyal subordinates were given authority, responsibilities, land, and the spoils of war enough to bind them by interest if not by affection. He rewarded the faithful publicly, making their rises an advertisement. A man could prosper if he served well. Genghis Khan also possessed a burning prudence. He did not pounce aimlessly. When heavy rains or blistering heat came, he paused. He read the sky. He measured the season's temper and planned campaigns when the animals' hooves matched the earth's rhythm. Logistics, the slow arithmetic of food, fodder, and movement, mattered to him like doctrine. He built bridges of supply and kept the wolf of hunger at bay in order to win the calmer, long victories. By the time of his death in 1227, the empire he had founded stretched farther than any single ruler before him had held in one contiguous sweep. From the Sea of Japan to the Caspian, from Siberia's pines down toward the deserts of Persia, his law and cavalry stamped across a landscape of incredible variety. Population movements, the exchange of crops, and the mingling of languages followed the hoofbeats. For all the slaughter the campaigns wrought, there were hospitals, irrigation works, and new cities in their wake. The Mongol age reopened routes for trade and exchange and even disease. The latter, a dark thread that would later ride along trade routes. Legends grew up around him as if the steppe itself had a mind to mythologize. Stories told of his supernatural birth, of a blood clot in his hand, or a wolf that served as an omen. Tales that made him more than a man in the telling. Yet, when you strip away the embroidery, you find a leader of undeniable craft. A man who rose from hardship, who learned early that order bested chaos, who used adaptability where others used arrogance, who made a code, rewarded competence, and used terror and mercy in a blended policy that shocked contemporaries and reshaped a world. His burial, like many parts of his private life, is wrapped in secrecy and myth. The exact place of his grave is unknown. Some say it lies in an unmarked pasture, hidden by men who killed witnesses, who diverted the road until no one could follow the burial cortege, who let horses trample the earth to erase tracks. Others believe more elaborate rites took place to hide the final resting place. In any case, the absence of a tomb became itself a kind of immortality, a story that invited pilgrimage and speculation. The empire he left behind splintered under his heirs, as empires often do when a great will fractures into smaller ambitions. His sons and grandsons carved the land into khanats, sometimes quarreling, sometimes trading, sometimes falling into conflict with the steady rhythm of history. Yet the institutions he set, merit-based command, a postal relay, a legal order that protected commerce, proved resilient in many places. Cities that had been satellites of empire grew into nodes of exchange that outlived the founder. The Silk Road, for all its modern dangers, flourished under an uneasy Mongol peace called the Pax Mongolica. The modern world retains ambiguous echoes of his career. In some countries, he is a hero, a unifier, a man who broke feudal narrowness and opened doors to crafts and commerce. In others, he is a destroyer, remembered for the blood left in his wake. It is a mixed memory, and history, like the steppe wind, sweeps it now and then, sometimes piling praise in one place and shame in another. If you stand on a Mongolian plain at dusk, the smell of grass and horses in the fading light, and you listen closely, you might hear something like a long story being breathed across the land. It is the wind, perhaps, or the long echo of hooves that ran 1,000 years ago. Temüjin's life is part of that sound, wild, ordered, terrible, and oddly human. He was a man who made law from chaos, who put a price on loyalty, who built a world on the back of horses and the sweat of men, who opened the roads and let strangers pass through, and who left a legacy that scholars still untangle. Genghis Khan was a name born from the steppe, carried into cities with smoke and rumor, written in the scrolls of conquered kings, and turned over again and again in the hands of storytellers. He is not only a conqueror, but a maker of connection, a harsh, uncompromising force who, in his violence, called forth a new order. The grass still grows where his banners once passed. The wind still tells of riders. History keeps turning as it must, but the steppe remembers. And as the night closes on this long tale, imagine the last light sliding off the distant hills, the sound of a lowing herd, the soft creak of a yurt flap. Temüjin, Genghis Khan, gone from flesh but present in the steady pulse of roads and trade and law that stitched continents together. The story ebbs like a tide, and the plain exhales another long, slow breath. After the Mongol banners were raised high above the horizon, Temüjin's empire began to stretch farther than most men could imagine. The winds of the steppe carried news of his armies, like whispers drifting from camp to camp. Each season brought new conquests, but also the slow rhythm of life among the yurts. In the mornings, the cold air would sting the nose, while horses snorted clouds of steam into the pale light. Women prepared fermented mare's milk in leather sacks. Children ran between the wagons, their laughter faint against the endless grasslands. And Temüjin, now Genghis Khan, would sit in a simple felt tent, his eyes half closed, listening to reports from far-off lands. He had generals who could ride for weeks without rest, messengers who carried orders across deserts and mountains, craftsmen who built siege weapons that could break city walls thought to be unbreakable. But still, the Khan would rise before dawn, walk out into the cold, and look at the stars as if searching for guidance. The constellations above the steppe had not changed since he was a boy, and perhaps, he thought, they never would. The campaigns westward were long. Cities along the Silk Road fell one by one, their rulers bowing to the Khan or facing ruin. Caravans brought silks, spices, and stories of lands beyond the horizon. His armies crossed rivers in the dead of winter, the ice cracking under hooves. They stormed cities whose towers had stood for centuries. Yet, in every new place, he left behind laws, simple, harsh, and meant to bind a growing empire together. At night, around the campfires, warriors spoke in low voices. They told of battles fought in snowstorms so thick you could not see the man beside you, of deserts where the air shimmered and men's lips cracked from thirst, of rivers that ran red in spring when the ice melted and the memories of war flowed with it. Genghis listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes silent. He was not without mercy, but mercy was a rare coin in the life he led. He rewarded loyalty with land and riches, but betrayal with swiftness and certainty. And those who thought they could hide in distant mountains or behind high walls often learned that the steppe had long arms. In the east, his name became a shadow that stretched across valleys and rivers. In the west, it was a word spoken in fear in the markets and palaces of far kingdoms. Yet, for the Khan, each conquest was only another step, another horizon to chase. He knew the empire would not last forever. But while the grass grew, while the horses ran, and while his warriors rode under the open sky, he would press on. The years rolled on across the steppe, and the Khan's empire spread like ink on parchment. From the frost-bitten edges of Siberia to the warm sands beyond the Oxus River, his banners fluttered over conquered lands. But even as he grew older, the rhythm of his life remained tied to the same things: the wind, the grass, the sound of hooves. His court was not a palace of marble and gold. It was a moving city of felt tents and wagons, a place where decisions that shaped the fate of nations were made while sitting on simple carpets, drinking tea boiled over smoky fires. Foreign envoys, bewildered by the lack of ceremony, would kneel in a tent no grander than that of a common soldier. And yet they knew they stood before the most powerful man alive. The Mongol war machine was unlike any the world had seen. It was built on speed, discipline, and the unyielding will of the Khan. Every soldier was a horseman, every horseman a warrior, and every warrior carried with him the memory of a harsh land where weakness meant death. They could live off the land, drinking their horses' milk, eating dried meat from leather pouches. They could ride for days without lighting a fire, vanishing into the horizon before the enemy could even organize a defense. Stories of his campaigns in Khwarezm spread far and wide. When the Shah of Khwarezm foolishly executed Mongol envoys, the Khan's wrath was relentless. Cities were besieged, markets burned, walls torn down stone by stone, survivors were few, and the Silk Road fell silent for a time, its trade routes choked with ash and memory. Yet even in conquest, Genghis Khan thought of the future. He ordered the construction of roads across his empire. He demanded that messages could travel faster than the sun across the land, changing horses at relay stations every few miles. This yam system, as it was called, bound the far corners of his territory together like threads in a great tapestry. In the evenings, when the winds grew softer and the fires burned low, he would sometimes walk alone to the edge of camp. Looking out over the grasslands, he saw not just the land he ruled, but the land that had made him. The same rivers he drank from as a boy still flowed under the moonlight. The same hills where he had hunted deer still lay quiet in the distance. In those moments, the Khan seemed not a conqueror, but simply a man of the steppe. His family was never far from his thoughts. He placed his sons in charge of different parts of the empire, teaching them the ways of governance and war. But he also feared the seeds of rivalry, for he knew too well how ambition could tear a family apart. It had nearly destroyed his own in his youth. The campaigns into the Jin dynasty of northern China brought new challenges. Stone fortresses loomed over valleys. The Mongols, unused to such defenses, learned the art of siege from captured engineers. Slowly, the cities fell, and with each victory came riches beyond measure. Silk, grain, precious metals. But Genghis Khan was not dazzled by wealth. His treasure was control. Control of land, of trade, of the hearts of his people. In the later years of his life, the Khan's beard had grown white. His eyes, though sharp, carried the weight of countless campaigns. He had seen too much death to fear his own. When he rode, it was no longer at the head of every charge. Yet even in his final campaigns, the enemy trembled when they heard he was coming. The exact circumstances of his death remain a mystery. Some say he fell from his horse during a hunt. Others whisper of wounds kept secret to prevent the morale of the army from breaking. The truth lies buried somewhere under the vast steppe he called home. His burial was hidden from the world. The funeral procession rode deep into the wilderness. Horses trampled the earth flat, erasing all signs of the grave. Streams were diverted, trees cut, paths lost. And then, according to legend, the soldiers who buried him were themselves slain, so no one would ever reveal the site. Yet his legacy could not be buried. From his bloodline came rulers who would shape Asia and Europe for generations. His empire, though it would fragment, left behind trade routes, laws, and cultural exchanges that still echo today. And the steppe still remembers. On nights when the wind howls over the grass and the stars are bright, some say you can almost hear the thunder of hooves. A reminder that once a boy named Temüjin rose from nothing and became the Khan of all Khans.